Where did Crassus die, and what were the circumstances surrounding his death? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Hello, I'm Alex and welcome to the History Chronicles. If you like our work, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel in return for exclusive perks, please visit our Patreon page. Now, on with the video. Today's History Chronicle begins on the 9th day of June in the year 53 BC. On that day, one of the late Roman Republic's most prominent politicians and citizens, the Triumvirate Crisis, who 20 years earlier had crushed the rebellion of the famed gladiator Spartacus, rode at the head of a Roman army of over 40,000 troops through Carrhae in Upper Mesopotamia, near the border of modern-day Turkey and Iraq. Despite leading one of the biggest armies ever sent by Rome into the region, within 2 days, over half of the force had been killed or captured. Crassus amongst them. Marcus Licinius Crassus was born around 115 BC. Here we explore how Crassus ended up at Carrhae, and the reason for his catastrophic defeat and his own death. He was a member of the Licinia clan, an ancient plebeian family of the city which had risen during the Republican period to a position of considerable authority, such that his father was a member of the Roman Senate, the senior governing body of the Roman Republic. Though he was his father's second son, the death of both his elder brother and his father in quick succession in the 90s and early 80s BC left Crassus as the main heir of the family. However, he fled to Spain in the mid-80s BC when the supporters of Gaius Marius, whose opponent Cornelius Sulla, Crassus supported, took control of Rome in the prelude to the First Roman Civil War. When that First Civil War finally came in 83 BC, it provided the first opportunity for Crassus to attain some glory in Rome, an empire in which conquest and military success was the key to acquiring high status. A 2-year war between the forces of Sulla and Marius culminated at the Battle of the Colline Gate, just outside the city of Rome itself, late in 82 BC. In this decisive conflict, Crassus commanded the right flank of Sulla's army, as it was his victory on the right flank and his movement to support Sulla in the centre which won the day after hours of fighting. Sulla would not forget how loyal he had been. In the aftermath of the civil war, Crassus acquired great wealth in Rome. Sulla proscribed thousands of Marius' supporters, confiscating their wealth and lands and redistributing them amongst his own allies. Crassus was chief amongst them, his wealth increasing from 300 talents to 7,100 talents, or approximately 229 tons of gold. If converted into American dollars or pounds sterling today, this would make him a multi-billionaire. He then subsequently used his wealth to buy up huge amounts of property around Rome and to invest in other activities, such that by the late 70s BC, Crassus was reputedly the wealthiest citizen of the entire Roman Republic. Crassus's wealth was matched by his political ascendancy. In 73 BC, he became a praetor in Rome. The following year, he was placed in charge of the army which suppressed the revolt of the gladiator army led by Spartacus in southern Italy. And in 70 BC, he gained the consulship, the most senior office in the Roman Republic. By 60 BC, he was one of the most powerful political figures in Rome, and as the Republic continued to fragment, he, Julius Caesar, and Pompeius Magnus formed what has become known as the First Triumvirate, through which they dominated the Republic's politics for the next several years. By the 50s BC, the three figures were vying for political primacy within the Republic. This was the context in which Crassus elected to take up the governorship of the Roman province of Syria in the eastern Mediterranean in 54 BC. Here, he would attempt to outdo his rivals Pompey and Caesar. Pompey's great military conquests had been achieved in past years, and he was desperately trying to retain his status in Rome, while Caesar was in the process of conquering the vast region of Gaul, approximating to modern-day France in the 50s BC. Crassus, not wanting to be outdone by his rival, determined upon arriving in Syria so that he could outshine Caesar if he waged a successful war against Rome's habitual enemy on its eastern border, that being the Parthian Empire. The Parthian Empire had been formed in the mid-3rd century BC, when the Parni tribe began conquering the Seleucid Empire, one of the successor empires to the conquests of Alexander the Great a century earlier. By the end of the 2nd century BC, the Parthians had expanded to control the region approximating to modern-day Iran and Iraq, and also parts of western Pakistan and Afghanistan. Such was the strength of the Parthian Empire by the 1st century BC that they were the only power in the region which had managed to withstand Roman expansion in the Middle East. Now, Crassus determined that he could succeed where others had failed, and achieve great glory on his return to Rome. As soon as he arrived in Syria, Crassus was presented with a perfectly good reason for intervening against the Parthians. A civil war of sorts had recently broken out within the Parthian Empire, as their ruler, Phraates III, was assassinated by his sons Orodes and Mithridates in 58 BC. The brothers had quickly fallen out themselves, and in 54 BC, Orodes seized sole power himself and Mithridates fled to Syria. He arrived there right around the time that Crassus took up the governorship of the province. Thus it was that Crassus began quickly assembling an army to invade Parthia, with the surface justification that he was intervening there on behalf of Mithridates, to support his rightful claim to the Parthian throne. The force Crassus now assembled was a huge army. According to the 2nd century AD Greco-Roman historical biographer Plutarch, Crassus quickly brought together 7 legions, consisting of somewhere between 28,000 and 35,000 heavy infantry. These were supplemented by 4,000 light cavalry and 4,000 heavy cavalry, as well as a 1,000-strong detachment of veteran cavalry from the Gallic Wars. Complementing these were thousands of troops provided by some of Rome's client states in the broader region, notably those of King Artavasdes of Armenia. As such, Crassus marched against Parthia in 53 BC with well in excess of 40,000 men, one of the most formidable Roman armies ever seen in the East. However, he made a pivotal mistake early on. While King Artavasdes of Armenia had provided several thousand troops to support Crassus, the Roman general refused a more wide-ranging offer from the Armenian monarch to provide him with tens of thousands of troops and allow him to pass along a safe route east through Armenia. Wary that Artavasdes wanted to claim some of the lands which might be conquered from the Parthians, Crassus refused this further offer of aid and instead marched directly from Syria into Mesopotamia. He was then duped by a local guide in the employ of the Parthians into taking a route through a barren desert in the region. It was an ominous beginning. Eventually, the Parthian army and Crassus's Romans met at Carrhae, near the border between modern-day Turkey and Iraq. We know that the Battle of Carrhae took place on the 9th of June 53 BC, as the date is provided in Book 6 of the Fasti, written by the early imperial poet and controversialist Ovid. The Parthians were heavily outnumbered here. By some estimates, their general Serena had only just over 10,000 men against 4 times as many Romans, but their forces consisted almost entirely of light and highly mobile cavalry, whereas the Romans were primarily infantrymen and were dehydrated and exhausted from days of marching through the Middle Eastern desert at the height of summer. When Crassus and his senior commander, Gaius Cassius Longinus, became aware of the nearby Parthian army, they were panicked. They knew their forces were in a poor state for battle after the march through the desert, and they had no reconnaissance intelligence with which to determine the strength of the enemy. Moreover, Serena had his men in the distance beat on hollow drums to convey the impression that they were more numerous than they actually were, while they sported bright clothing which, in the summer sun, made their ranks look greater than they in fact were. This led Crassus and his commanders into taking a cautious approach, and they formed their troops into a square and waited. The decision to form the legions up into a square was a disastrous one in the end. In the hours that followed, thousands of Parthian light cavalry made movements forward to fire off volley after volley of arrows into the Roman lines, making a quick retreat back to their own lines. Crassus attempted to send his skirmishers forward to intercept them, but they could not keep pace with the light and mobile Parthian cavalry. When he ordered the legions to form a shield wall against the relentless waves of arrows, Serena sent his heavier cavalry forward to charge the line and inflict further casualties on legionaries who could not maintain a shield wall and repel heavy cavalry charges at the same time. As the hours rolled by, the numerical advantage Crassus and the Romans had enjoyed was reduced considerably. By now the Roman general was hoping that the Parthians would soon run out of arrows, and sent a large detachment forward to try to scupper the light cavalry attacks. These men, who were led by Crassus's own son, were soon surrounded and cut off. They were annihilated in the hour that followed, but not before Crassus determined to move forward to try to relieve them. As he did, he was confronted by Parthian forces moving towards them with his son's head on a spear. Shaken, he now ordered a full-scale retreat to the town of Carrhae nearby, leaving thousands of wounded Romans on the field to be massacred by the Parthians. Ensconced in the town and having lost as much as half of his forces during the battle, Crassus faced a mutiny from his troops who wished to negotiate with the Parthians. Crassus reluctantly agreed, But the Parthians had other ideas. During a parley the following day, an altercation occurred during which Crassus was attacked and killed by the Parthian envoys. Legend has it that afterward they poured molten gold down the throat of his severed head in mockery of his great wealth, and this was paraded at the Parthian court afterwards. By some accounts, the head of Rome's wealthiest citizen was even being used as a prop in a play performed before the Parthian nobility in the weeks to come. Gaius Cassius Longinus gathered as many of the remaining Roman soldiers as he could at Carrhae after Crassus was killed and retreated back towards Syria, being harried by the Parthians as he did so. Sources estimate that as little as 10,000 of the over 40,000 men who had invaded Parthia made it back to Syria, while the Parthians had experienced minimal casualties. It was one of the costliest defeats ever experienced by a Roman army, and for several years thereafter, the Parthians had the upper hand against the Romans on the eastern borders of the Republic. Crassus's death brought to an end the first triumvirate. Afterwards, the other two triumvirs, Julius Caesar and Pompey, became more antagonistic, with the Roman army increasingly favouring Caesar and the Roman Senate and old nobility supporting Pompey. Eventually, in 49 BC, Caesar led his troops over the Rubicon River and into Italy, initiating a civil war with Pompey. When it ended 4 years later, Caesar was victorious, though he never made himself emperor of Rome and was assassinated just a year later. However, his adopted heir, Octavian, subsequently claimed power and proclaimed himself as Emperor Caesar Augustus in 27 BC, bringing the Roman Republic to an end. Because of his role in the First Triumvirate and the rise of Julius Caesar, Crassus has been the subject of many studies, films and books over the years. Typically, Crassus is depicted as someone who was talented in business, but hopeless when it came to the battlefield. This is somewhat unfair. While Carrhae was a spectacular disaster, and Crassus paid for it with his own life, he was a relatively accomplished soldier, having played a crucial role in the Battle of the Colline Gate in 82 BC, and then having suppressed the slave revolt led by Spartacus a decade later. Perhaps the lesson of Carrhae is that the quest for primacy in Rome as the Republic crumbled meant that individuals like Crassus were forced into risky decisions, such as the one to invade the Parthian Empire, with horrendous consequences. You have been watching the History Chronicles. We'd love to know what you think of Crassus. Please let us know below, and if you enjoyed our video, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, if you'd like to support our work going forward, please visit our Patreon page, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the History Chronicles.